I went to assemble her new bed, but her daughter didn't leave the room, and everything changed between us. The day began like any other, but the text that appeared on my phone broke the monotony in a way I didn't expect. It was from her, a woman I'd admired from afar, not for scandalous reasons, but because there was a quiet elegance about her that lingered in memory. The message was simple. Could I come over and help assemble a new bed? Nothing flirtatious, nothing unusual, but the tone carried an underlying warmth, a subtle invitation into her world. I found myself staring at the screen longer than necessary. My mind ran through practicalities, tools, screws, alignment, but beneath that, a small spark of curiosity and anticipation flickered. I arrived at her house, a charming space that reflected someone who appreciated quiet order and understated beauty. The door opened, and there she was, mid-40s, graceful, her posture confident yet relaxed. She wore a simple sweater, hair loosely tucked behind one ear, eyes lighting up in recognition. There was a soft, familiar scent, something floral, something warm, that immediately put me at ease, yet made my heart race unexpectedly. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice smooth, calm, but carrying an undertone of something unspoken. Her smile was small but genuine, the kind that reaches the eyes before the lips. I noticed the subtle vulnerability behind it, a flicker of hesitation, the slight pause before she stepped aside to let me in. That pause lingered longer than it needed to, and for some reason, it tugged at me. The house felt lived in but tidy, each room hinting at a life well curated yet not overly rigid. There were personal touches, framed photos on a shelf, a carefully arranged vase of flowers, the faint smell of coffee still clinging to the air. These details drew me in, giving a sense of intimacy without intrusion. Her presence amplified it. She moved with a composed grace, every step measured, yet natural. When she spoke, I noticed how her hands gestured lightly, how the tips of her fingers brushed the edges of furniture, and how even these small movements seemed intentional yet effortlessly elegant. As we moved toward the bedroom, her daughter lingered nearby, quietly observing. I became acutely aware of the social dynamic, the mother's poised warmth, the daughter's watchful eyes, and my own nervous curiosity. My focus had to split between practical tasks and subtle social cues, but even that made the experience more intense, more alive. When she handed me the first tool, our fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that was almost electric. I felt it, though she likely didn't, or perhaps she did, and her fingers lingered just long enough for me to notice. My mind raced with thoughts I barely allowed myself to admit: the age difference, the subtle social boundaries, the fact that this was just assembling a bed, but somehow, it felt like more. It felt like an invitation into something delicate, unsaid, and deeply human. Even before the first plank touched the floor, the stage was set. A day that could have been mundane, the assembly of a bed, was charged with anticipation, subtle glances, and a shared awareness that neither of us could quite articulate. Her presence was magnetic, her vulnerability tempered with confidence, and her daughter's quiet observation added a delicate tension to every interaction. I realized then that the day would be about more than screws and wooden slats. It would be about noticing her, noticing the unspoken, and navigating the delicate currents of human connection that had already begun to pull us together. Once we began assembling the bed, the room transformed from a simple task space into a subtle stage of quiet intimacy. The planks of wood and scattered tools created obstacles, opportunities, and excuses for proximity. Every time we reached for the same screw or adjusted a slat together, our hands came near one another, sometimes brushing unintentionally. Each fleeting contact carried an understated electricity that neither of us acknowledged aloud, but both of us felt. She instructed me with calm authority, her voice low and steady, yet there was a softness beneath the confidence. "Could you hold this in place?" she asked, extending her hands toward me. Our fingers met as I aligned the board, and I felt a pulse of warmth from the brief touch. I caught myself lingering slightly too long, as if hoping the moment would stretch. She didn't pull away immediately either, just enough to let the air thrum with quiet tension. Her daughter remained in the room, perched on a chair with a tablet in hand, occasionally commenting on progress or asking a clarifying question. Her presence created a delicate barrier, a reason to temper our gestures, but it also heightened every subtle movement. A brush of shoulders as we both crouched to fit a corner frame, a shared laugh over a stubborn screw, the way our eyes met for a brief second before darting away, all of it built a tension that was neither crude nor overt, only deeply human and quietly magnetic. Conversation flowed naturally, revealing snippets of her life, her humor, and her intelligence. She spoke of mundane topics, favorite cafes, a recent book, but I noticed the little personal touches in her stories, the way she tilted her head when recounting something funny, the soft exhale of frustration when a plank wouldn't align, the delicate rise and fall of her tone that hinted at emotional depth. I responded with curiosity and subtle empathy, careful not to overstep but quietly leaning into the connection. I became acutely aware of details I might normally overlook, the gentle sweep of hair from her face, the scent of her perfume mixing with the faint aroma of polished wood, the warmth of her hand as she studied a plank. Every gesture felt meaningful, every glance weighted with unspoken communication. I was aware that the daughter's presence required decorum, but it also made each small, permissible contact, an accidental touch, a shared laugh, a glance held just a second longer, feel amplified, like sparks dancing in a slow-burning fire. Despite the task at hand, I realized I was observing more than assembling a bed. I was noticing the way she carried herself, how she interacted with her daughter, how her presence seemed to command calm and warmth simultaneously. I felt the pull of admiration, curiosity, and something more subtle, a sense of tension that whispered of emotions neither of us dared name. By the time the first few pieces were in place, the room felt charged with anticipation, not for romance yet, but for understanding, for closeness, for connection. The daughter's watchful eyes reminded us of boundaries, yet within those limits, we discovered a quiet intimacy. A shared glance, a fleeting touch, a small laugh, each moment stacked delicately, preparing the ground for deeper emotional resonance. In that simple act of collaboration, assembling a bed became more than a chore. It was the first brush against something fragile and compelling, the realization that subtle, human gestures could carry the weight of unspoken desire, trust, and curiosity. The day was no longer about wooden screws, it was about noticing, being present, and feeling the tension that neither distance nor propriety could fully erase. The room suddenly felt different when her daughter stepped out, claiming a phone call or a small errand. The subtle barrier that had kept the air taut with social caution dissolved, leaving only the two of us in quiet, unspoken tension. The change was almost imperceptible at first, a slight relaxation in her posture, a gentler cadence in her voice, but I noticed it immediately. Almost done with this side, she said softly, adjusting a plank. Our shoulders brushed again, this time without hesitation. The contact lingered just a moment longer, and I felt warmth spreading through my chest, subtle but insistent. I handed her a screwdriver, and our fingers met, brushing lightly. It was an ordinary gesture, yet charged with an intensity neither of us dared acknowledge. I caught myself holding her gaze a fraction too long, feeling the unspoken question lingering between us. Did she feel it too? Conversation deepened naturally. The light chatter of before gave way to personal anecdotes, and she shared small glimpses of her life, stories of her work, her daughter's quirks, and memories that hinted at both joy and quiet solitude. There was a vulnerability in her voice, a softness that I hadn't noticed when her daughter was present. I listened intently, offering gentle laughter, empathetic nods, and the occasional reassuring word. Every reaction, every subtle expression, felt like a bridge drawing us closer, creating a fragile intimacy that was neither rushed nor forced. I noticed details that grounded me in the moment, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the warm, oiled wood, the soft hum of sunlight filtering through the blinds, the way her hands moved with delicate precision. When she leaned over to adjust a plank, her hair brushed my arm, sending a quiet shiver down my spine. I could feel her warmth radiating toward me, the subtle rise and fall of her breath as she spoke. Each gesture, each movement, seemed layered with meaning, simple, everyday actions imbued with attention neither of us dared name aloud. There was a pause, a brief silence as we both adjusted the final screws in a corner of the bed. She looked up at me, and our eyes locked. The room was filled with unspoken words, lingering glances, and the quiet knowledge that something delicate was building. I wanted to speak, to say something that might illuminate the connection forming between us, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I let the moment stretch, savoring the closeness without breaking it. Her presence was magnetic yet comforting, a paradox that drew me in while keeping me grounded. For the first time, the age difference, the social boundaries, and the quiet propriety that had restrained me all faded into the background. It wasn't about romance, or at least not yet. It was about noticing her fully, about sharing a space and a time that felt intimate without being explicit. By the time she adjusted the final plank, I realized that this moment alone had shifted something between us. There was an awareness now, an electric tension beneath the calm, a silent acknowledgement of curiosity and admiration that neither of us would voice yet. The daughter's temporary absence had created a space where subtle vulnerability, small touches, and lingering glances could exist freely, planting the seeds for the slow, intricate connection that was only just beginning to take shape. Even a simple task, assembling a bed, had become a shared, almost sacred experience, marked by moments of attention, care, and quiet emotional resonance that neither time nor circumstance could erase. Just as the quiet rhythm between us had begun to settle, a rhythm of shared glances, fleeting touches, and unspoken understanding, the sound of the front door opening punctured the stillness. Her daughter stepped back into the room, her presence instantly altering the atmosphere. The private bubble we had been floating in dissolved, replaced by a subtle but palpable tension. The intimacy that had been building now had to navigate an invisible boundary, and every gesture or glance became a careful negotiation. Her daughter moved casually around the room, holding a tablet and asking occasional questions, yet her eyes remained alert, subtly watching the interactions between her mother and me. It was an unspoken reminder that our behavior now existed under quiet scrutiny. Despite this, the connection between us hadn't disappeared, it had simply adapted. The tension became tempered, more restrained, yet no less electric. We returned to assembling the bed, carefully aligning slats and adjusting screws. Every movement had to seem purely practical, but the undercurrent of attention lingered. When our hands brushed while passing a tool, straightening a plank, or steadying a corner, it was brief but meaningful. I noticed the warmth of her skin, the subtle scent of her perfume, and the almost imperceptible quickening of my own heartbeat. Each accidental brush became a small, stolen moment, charged precisely because it had to be fleeting. Conversation shifted into safe territory, casual humor, practical observations, and small talk. Our laughter was quieter, slightly measured, but still carried the warmth of shared amusement. Our eyes met briefly, long enough to convey an unspoken understanding, then quickly diverted to the task at hand. Every glance became loaded with silent meaning, a reminder that the moment alone we had shared before her daughter's return was now out of reach, but not forgotten. Even mundane interactions felt intimate. Adjusting the same slat, leaning over the bed simultaneously, or handing each other a tool, all ordinary acts became exercises in subtlety. The necessity of restraint magnified every small touch, every fleeting smile. The room, filled with wooden tools, was now also charged with an invisible tension, a delicate dance of proximity, emotion, and careful control. I found myself watching her in ways I hadn't before, how her hands moved with quiet precision, how her shoulders shifted with each step, how her voice carried warmth even in casual sentences. There was a magnetic pull in her presence, a combination of composure, confidence, and vulnerability that I couldn't ignore. Each moment felt heightened precisely because we had to guard it. Our connection had become both fragile and intense. By the time the bed was nearly assembled, the tension had evolved into something almost palpable. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between us, a silent agreement that the bond we were forming was real, even if it had to remain carefully measured in her daughter's presence. Every glance, every fleeting touch, every quiet smile was charged with meaning, laying the groundwork for deeper connection. Her daughter's return had not diluted what had begun, it had crystallized it. The subtle attraction, the curiosity, the warmth, all now existed under a new lens of awareness. The emotional pull between us remained undeniable, sharpened by restraint, and more compelling because we had to navigate it delicately. By now, the bed was almost complete, and a sense of accomplishment lingered in the air. The task that had begun as purely mechanical had evolved into a subtle interplay of emotions, gestures, and shared attention. The daughter was present, quietly observing, but the earlier tension had transformed into something more relaxed, a space where warmth, trust, and gentle affection could quietly surface without overstepping boundaries. A small mishap occurred. A plank wouldn't fit as expected. She let out a soft laugh, a sound so genuine and unguarded that it made the tension in my chest ease just slightly. I chuckled along, offering a light-hearted suggestion. The laughter was contagious, rolling softly through the room, and for a moment, it felt as if the world outside had disappeared. The daughter smiled at our exchange, seemingly accepting it as harmless camaraderie, giving us the freedom to breathe a little easier. In the midst of correcting the plank, our hands met again. This time, it wasn't fleeting or accidental. It was deliberate, yet natural, as if the touch itself was a small reassurance. The warmth of her skin under my fingers and the subtle pressure as she studied the wood communicated more than words could. It was an unspoken trust, an acknowledgement that, even in ordinary actions, we were sharing something intimate and quietly profound. Conversation flowed with ease now. She began sharing stories of her life, moments of triumph, the challenges of raising her daughter, memories of youth and lessons learned. Her voice carried a calm authority, yet there were nuances of vulnerability that revealed themselves in the pauses, the slight catch of breath, or the faint smile that accompanied recollections of bittersweet memories. I responded with empathy, careful humor, and attentive listening, each word chosen to convey understanding and presence. Every interaction deepened the quiet bond forming between us, building a bridge that extended beyond casual acquaintance. I noticed every subtle detail, the way her fingers moved when she emphasized a point, the tilt of her head when she laughed, the warmth in her eyes that seemed to look right through the ordinary task at hand. Even the scent of her perfume mixed with the faint aroma of polished wood, lingering as a gentle reminder of her presence. The room, filled with tools and the half-assembled bed, had become a stage for something far more meaningful, a shared human connection that unfolded slowly, deliberately, and deeply. Occasional glances toward her daughter reminded us of boundaries, yet the moments of closeness between us felt more potent because of this awareness. A shared smile, a brief touch while adjusting a plank, the quiet encouragement in her tone, all these small gestures spoke volumes. They conveyed trust, warmth, and a subtle curiosity that neither of us yet dared to name. By the time the final screws were tightened, the bed stood complete. Yet the day's real accomplishment wasn't the furniture, it was the bridge we had built. Shared laughter had broken initial hesitation. Mutual trust had emerged in fleeting touches and attentive glances. In that room, amid wooden tools, we had discovered a delicate intimacy, a slow-burning connection that promised depth, emotional resonance, and a sense of human closeness neither of us had expected when I first stepped over the threshold. Even as we tidied the workspace, the energy lingered, an invisible thread of warmth and understanding, a quiet anticipation that the story between us was only beginning. The bed was finally assembled, each plank aligned, each screw tightened. The room, once filled with the clatter of tools and scattered pieces of wood, now held a quiet calm. Yet the sense of completion brought with it a strange weight, a mixture of relief, lingering tension, and unspoken anticipation. The daughter remained present, occasionally offering a casual comment or adjusting a pillow, but the dynamic between us had shifted. Every glance, Every subtle gesture now carried extra meaning, amplified by the day's slow, intricate unfolding of trust and curiosity. As I prepared to leave, I found myself hesitating, reluctant to step back into the ordinary world outside the warm cocoon of her home. She approached to inspect the bed one last time, and our movements brushed against each other, her hand grazing mine as she adjusted the final corner. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet loaded with an intimacy that neither of us dared name. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers, and the quiet rhythm of her breath as she bent slightly to check alignment. It was a moment suspended between action and awareness, ordinary yet profoundly charged. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time that day, we allowed ourselves to linger in that gaze. There was a softness there, a flicker of vulnerability tempered with the confidence that had drawn me in from the start. Her lips curved in a gentle, almost shy smile, a silent acknowledgement of the shared intimacy between us. Words seemed unnecessary. Everything we felt, everything unsaid, was contained in that fleeting look. The room felt smaller, warmer, and more electric, despite the daughter's quiet presence just a few feet away. I found myself caught between propriety and desire, wanting to linger yet knowing the boundaries that must be respected. The age difference, the daughter's watchful eyes, and the subtle societal expectations all whispered restraint. Yet beneath that restraint was an undeniable pull, a magnetic tension that had built over the course of the day. Every brush of our fingers, every shared laugh, every glance had stacked upon the last, creating a delicate intimacy that neither time nor circumstance could erase. Finally, the moment of farewell arrived. We exchanged words of thanks, simple, casual, yet weighted with significance. Her voice was soft, carrying warmth and an undertone of curiosity. "Thank you again for everything today," she said, and I could hear in her tone a hesitation, a wish that the day didn't have to end. I replied, careful not to overstep, yet my own voice carried the subtle echo of the connection we had forged. The final handoff of tools became an unspoken ritual. Our fingers brushed once more, slightly longer than necessary, and I felt the quiet acknowledgement of what had passed between us. It was a touch filled with memory, warmth, and possibility, a promise that the day's intimacy was not fleeting, even if it had to remain restrained for now. As I stepped toward the door, I glanced back and saw her standing there, framed by the soft afternoon light. Her eyes lingered, and I knew that both of us were thinking the same thing, that this day, this simple task, had become something far greater. Something slow, deliberate, and profoundly human. A lingering goodbye had been exchanged, yet it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning, the calm before an emotional resolution that neither of us could yet define, but both of us quietly hoped for. The bed was assembled, the room tidy, and the afternoon light softened through the curtains, casting a gentle glow over the quiet space. I stood near the doorway, hands slightly trembling, not from exertion, but from the lingering tension and warmth that had accumulated over the day. What began as a simple request to help assemble furniture had transformed into an intricate dance of emotions, subtle glances, and fleeting touches that neither of us would forget. She approached, carrying a cup of tea she had poured during the final touches. Her movements were composed yet relaxed, and the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy aroma of wood and sunlight. She handed me the cup with a slight, almost imperceptible smile, and our fingers brushed lightly. The contact lingered just enough to convey warmth and familiarity, leaving a residue of quiet longing in the air. It was in that moment I realized how deeply the day had affected me, and, I suspected, her as well. We sat together briefly, the bed behind us a symbol not just of work completed but of the shared experience that had subtly, irrevocably connected us. Conversation flowed easily, lighter now, filled with small observations, humor, and reflections on the day's unexpected intimacy. Every gesture, a brush of her hand as she reached for her cup, the slight tilt of her head while listening, the warmth in her eyes, carried layers of meaning. It was in these small, YouTube-safe moments that the true essence of our connection revealed itself: trust, understanding, and the quiet thrill of closeness. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between us, a shared awareness of the bond we had formed. The daughter was nearby, yet the presence of this young, observant witness had no power to diminish the resonance of what had unfolded. Instead, it made every glance, every subtle smile, every careful touch feel amplified, charged with unspoken emotion that only the two of us fully understood. The intimacy of the day had been cultivated slowly, deliberately, with restraint, and now it settled into a calm, enduring warmth. Before leaving, we lingered in a moment that neither of us wanted to break. Words seemed inadequate to express the depth of feeling, yet our gestures spoke volumes. A gentle, lingering handshake that became almost a handhold, a smile that conveyed more than casual gratitude, and eyes that held the quiet promise of understanding and curiosity. It was a farewell imbued not with finality, but with the possibility of continuation, a slow-burn connection ready to unfold further, in time and on its own terms. As I stepped toward the door, I glanced back at her, and the sunlight framed her silhouette, softening her features, highlighting the grace and warmth that had captivated me from the beginning. There was no need for dramatic confession, no need for rushed emotion. What existed between us was quiet, profound, and undeniable. It was the culmination of a day filled with shared effort, laughter, subtle touches, and genuine human connection, a connection that would linger long after the tools were put away. The emotional resolution was complete, whether it led to a romantic beginning, a cautious acknowledgement of mutual curiosity, or a profound, platonic bond. In the end, the day had changed us both. I left her home with a sense of gratitude, warmth, and anticipation, knowing that the subtle intimacy we had shared, small gestures, gentle touches, and lingering glances would remain with me, quietly shaping the way I saw her, the world, and the possibility of connection itself.